I got a couple quotes here from Dereck Chisora. First of all, he's talking about Dillian Whyte. So let me give you this quote first. This is from an interview with TalkSport. He said, quote, "I'm better than him. I won the first fight and they gave it to him. Then in the second fight, I had a funny ref. I will push for another fight and a rematch against Dillian Whyte, 100%, end quote. And the second quote here, he's talking about Mike Tyson and Holyfield coming back. And he's also talking about his manager, David Haye, potentially having a fight. So this is another quote from Dereck Chisora. He said, quote, "I think that Holyfield should fight Mike Tyson. I'd like to see it. Shannon Briggs should also fight. I said to David Haye, he should fight Shannon Briggs. And he goes, no, I'm not ready for that yet. But he might. Anybody can come out of retirement. Remember that. Boxing is an unbelievable sport and it's an addiction," end quote. So those are two quotes from Del Boy Dereck Chisora. Now, most of us who have been listening to Chisora interviews for the past few years will have heard him say this over and over again, that in boxing, fans and fighters themselves tend to write people off too quickly. 1 or 2 losses, oh, you should retire. When Dereck Chisora has the old school fighter's mentality. I mean, Dereck Chisora as a fighter would have been right at home back in the 20s and in the 30s when fighters used to fight every couple weeks, where you could take 3-4 losses on the bounce, but then get 2 good wins and then you get a title shot. That's how it was back then, far more so than it is today. So he has the mentality of it's the fighting game. You win some, you lose some. Just because you've lost a few, it doesn't mean you can't still take down a world champion or a top contender. This is his mentality. He doesn't buy into the perceptions that the public have. And that's the reason that Dereck Chisora has been able to come back and prove people like me wrong. Because when he lost to Ajit Kabayel, I thought that was the end of Dereck Chisora. I didn't think he'd be able to come back and beat the likes of Carlos Takam. I didn't think he'd be able to come back and, push Dillian Whyte so close both times. I didn't think he'd be able to do that. But he did. So Dereck Chisora's mentality, where he doesn't really regard losses as any big deal, is the reason that he's been able to come back. Obviously, he has a certain amount of physical ability, but I'm talking about his mind state, his personality type. Yeah, he's not discouraged by losses the way most fighters are. He fights because he loves fighting and he likes making money, of course. Yeah. So as far as him saying that he'd like another fight against Dillian Whyte, I think it's a reasonable ambition to have. They've had 2 fights. Why not have the trilogy, the rubber match at some stage? He says that he still thinks he's better than Dillian Whyte, that he won the first fight. I think the first fight was genuinely very close. I know the narrative is it was a robbery, but I didn't see a robbery. Just the same way I didn't see a robbery in the first Fury Wilder fight. I think that was genuinely close as well. Same thing goes for the first Whyte Chisora fight. Any of you who have been following me for any length of time should know by now that I am not one of those people who screams robbery every time you see a close fight. I think that most fights they call robberies, and by they I mean the boxing public and the boxing fraternity. The majority of them are not actually robberies. They're just close fights where public perception is skewed by something. Either the charisma of one of the fighters, or perhaps it was a fight which they thought would be very easy and one-sided, and it turned out to be very competitive. So this skews the perception. And people think, oh my God, it was a robbery. Actually, if you watch it in the cold light of day, you score it objectively, most of these fights that people call robberies are not robberies. Some of them genuinely are. Some of them, Dereck Chisora was on the wrong end of a absolute robbery, which was the Robert Helenius fight. That was shocking. But the first Dillian Whyte fight, no, it wasn't a robbery. Could have gone either way. It was real tight. The second fight, I would say Dereck Chisora was genuinely ahead. In fact, the second fight, I think, was, easier to score than the first fight was. The second fight, I would say Chisora was genuinely ahead, and the judges certainly had him ahead going into that 11th round. But he says that the referee taking a point off him, threw him off his game, made him more reckless, and that allowed him to get caught with a big left hook. He says he's better than Dillian Whyte still. I mean, the result of the second fight was very conclusive, with Dereck Chisora being knocked out cold, but he was ahead on the cards. So I think he's got a right to say that he's better than Dillian Whyte. I think he's got a right to say that, or at least he's got the right to say that he's got Dillian Whyte's number, because to say that you're better than Dillian Whyte, that means that you would have to have a resume as good as Dillian Whyte. And he doesn't. Dereck Chisora's, beaten some decent fighters like Carlos Takam, etc. But I would say Dillian Whyte has definitely got a better resume than Dereck Chisora overall, if you look at the wins on Dillian Whyte's record. But again, styles make fights. And if Dereck Chisora was to say, I've just got his number, I wouldn't really argue with that, to be honest with you, because it just appears as though every time Dillian Whyte steps in the ring with Del Boy, it's going to be a tough fight for him. Now, I will say, though, that Dillian Whyte hurt Dereck Chisora in the first round of their rematch, and he didn't go for him. Maybe if he had gone for him, he could have taken him out early doors in that rematch. Anthony Joshua was actually commentating on that fight at the time, and he said he didn't understand why Dillian didn't jump on him then. Now, one thing that they learned from their first two fights, and I knew this from the first fight anyway, I think Dereck Chisora was wishful thinking, and he was telling himself the kind of things fighters usually tell themselves. But he kept saying that Dillian Whyte can't hurt me going into the first fight, and even after the first fight. He can't hurt me. But I saw Dillian Whyte hurt Dereck Chisora in the first fight. A lot of people didn't catch it. I think it was at the start of round 6. Dillian Whyte throws this left hook come uppercut. I think it's at the start of round 6 or start of round 7. He hits him with his left hook come uppercut. I think one of the commentators notices it. It might be David Hay. And it catches Dereck Chisora as he's trying to dip down, and it hurts him. Dereck Chisora backs up to the ropes, because normally Dereck Chisora is coming forward. He gets hit with his shot, then he backs up to the ropes. He goes into the corner. He's hurt. Now, he's not totally out of it and on wobbly legs, but it definitely buzzed him to the point where he had to back off and move around and recover. So that right there showed me, because a lot of people were saying that Dillian Whyte can't hurt Dereck Chisora after the first fight. And I said, you guys are wrong. He hurt him in that fight there. You just didn't catch it. And of course, in the rematch, he showed he can not only hurt Chisora with that left hook, but he can knock him out cold. So the third fight would be very interesting, because Dereck Chisora, would he be as gung-ho as he was in the first two fights, knowing now, it's not speculation, it's not conjecture, he knows for certain now that Dillian Whyte can turn his lights out with that left hook. So would he be more careful? Would he have the same kind of work rate, knowing that he could get taken out with one shot? Would it be a more cagey affair? So I guess we'll see. Hopefully we do get to see the third fight between the pair of them, because the first two were great fights. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Is Dereck Chisora better than Dillian Whyte? Does he have his number? Will there be a third fight? And if they do, who will your money be on next time? Let me know in the comment section, people. It's happening. I'm out.